to EPS Study Session 2. For those of you who don't already know it, my name is Trevelyn DeVette, and I'm your EPS Distance Learning Lecturer and EPS Distance Learning Module Coordinator. The title of the session, as you can see on this slide, is Guidelines for Success in Your Upcoming Academic Assignment. When I began putting this slide together, I wasn't sure whether to place a video clip in the session, but I thought that in these social distancing times, it really helps to see a semi-friendly face, and it helps to know that we are all truly in this together. I shall turn the camera off for the rest of the session, but I thought for now it would be really useful to utilize the technology that we are very blessed to have at our disposal. And I want to encourage you to utilize the technology that you have to keep in contact with one another, even if it is outside the academic space, but just use the technology that we have available to keep in contact with one another in these social distancing times. My intention and vision in creating this video tutorial session was to talk you through the marker's expectation for the application-based assignment that is now due on the 20th of April 2020. My hope is that at the end of this video tutorial, there will be further clarity around some of the questions that you have posed, and perhaps there will be some clarity about what we expect from you as markers. This video tutorial session should build on the assignment instructions that have already been given to you. So it is a really good idea to refer to the EPS assessment guide and the further guidelines that I've posted on ECR. Please have those handy in the session. You can find them on a folder right at the top of the page on the far left-hand corner. And I would really like to encourage you to take down as many notes as possible. And after the session is done, please would you use the forums available to you to post any queries or questions. I shall then respond to these questions within 3 working days. Although please feel free to help one another. As we've already said, in these trying times, we really are truly all in this together. As I have already mentioned, please note that the new assignment date has been changed to the 20th of April. This date may of course change, but please in the meantime work towards this date and do something every day that helps you work towards this. I shall be in contact with you throughout this period, just following up if I know more about the situation. I think we are all very much in the dark. But once again, like I say, let's try keep together in this, try keep connected from afar. And now I also wanted to address the direct elephant in the room, and that is obviously the coronavirus pandemic that is currently gripping our nation. I can completely empathize with your possible feelings of anxiety and uncertainty in these very isolating and unprecedented times. But my hope is that your studies provide you with a safe space that gives you a space to stimulate the much needed intellectual and cognitive needs that you have. Please do not neglect these during the lockdown period. It's very important that you try to keep up to date with your academics from a personal perspective, but also from an emotional wellness and psychological perspective. It's very important that you keep your mind stimulated in this time. There is a lot that is currently out of our control, but what we can control is our mental headspace. And I would thus like you to prioritize this in these 21 days. I also truly believe that we need to all start adapting to these new circumstances. And what really helps with this is by putting together a routine and putting together an academic timetable. As a distance learning student, you are in an advantaged position over many of our contact learning students, as you've been practicing this distance learning module for a while, but please don't neglect your studies and use this lockdown period wisely. I think the take-home message on this subject is do what you can and try your utmost to keep your future goals in mind. You are all enrolled in Embry with the intention of becoming teachers, and I would thus challenge you to keep doing something over the next 21 days that takes you one step closer to achieving that goal. Even if it's just catching up on your online activities, completing readings, and completing research, whatever it is that you do now will help prepare you for your future professions. This global pandemic has taught us many invaluable lessons. And one of those lessons is how important educators are in the maintaining of a harmonious functioning of society. So this remarkable role and very important responsibility is something that all of you have undertaken when you enrolled at Embry. So please, in these trying times, don't lose sight of the end goal. For the rest of this video tutorial, I will simply be narrating and talking through a lot of the assessment standards and learning outcomes that are required of you in this particular assessment. And I thought that to begin this discussion point, I really wanted to unpack this quote. And it is one of my favorite quotes because it reminds us about how important reading is to our physical well-being. I think we are all aware of the quote, knowledge is power, and we know that in order to be empowered, we need to read. So with this in mind, it's very important for you to keep up your reading, keep reading through all your academic material, keep up your pleasure reading, keep up your research, because this actually has holistic benefits. I'm sure that when I'm saying this point of holistic benefits, I'm hoping that many of you are thinking back to holism, the theory of holism, and the theory of the wheel of growth. These particular concepts have been unpacked and discussed in your study guide, and the take-home message from that, and it is a take-home message or theory from Bronfenbrenner's theory, and it is this whole idea of in order to understand the individual, in order to understand the challenges of the individual, and the individual's needs, you need to consider the individual as a whole. The individual is not just made up of one dimension, such as our physical dimension. We are made up of multiple different dimensions. These dimensions, of course, include our emotional dimension, which has emotional needs, our social dimension, our physical dimension, our spiritual dimension, and our psychological dimension. Each one of these things impact one another. So in order to keep ourselves holistically healthy, it's very important for us to keep reading and to keep emotionally and physically, psychologically stimulated. So the first thing that you can do to best prepare for this assignment is obviously to read through the guidelines very carefully. I've really tried to put as much detail as possible into the guidelines, and I've also given you a step-by-step instruction of what we require of you in the assignment. It's also very important for you to look through the marking rubric. This is obviously going to be the rubric that we as markers will use to assess your work, so it's very important to see what we are looking for. The marking rubric will explain the learning outcomes and assessment standards that we will require of you. So if you want to do really well in this assignment, please look to see the sort of criteria that we will be looking for. The The second thing is obviously your lecture notes, study guide, textbook, and of course your course reader will provide you with an overview of the theory that you require. Your course reader is particularly important with Bronfenbrenner's theory, as I'm sure you have picked up by now that your textbook does not cover Bronfenbrenner's theory. So it's very important for you to utilize your course reader here. Make it personally relevant and try to understand it from a personal space, and try to put the theory into your own words and through your own framework of understanding before you attempt the assignment. So the purpose of this assignment is obviously to encourage you to apply your own personal understanding of the theories to a particular case study. This means that, of course, many of you will have different responses. You'll have different ways of understanding the issues that are likely impacting and affecting the child, which in this case is Anele. So it's very important for you to take your understanding of theory and to be able to understand and explain the child's problematic behaviors through this framework of understanding. So please, your first starting point for this assignment is to understand the theory in a very meaningful manner. So as I've already said, you will be expected to use these theories as a theoretical lens to understand the factors and forces that will likely impact the child under observation. So in your course readers, there are other case studies available, and in your study guide, I have already mentioned from study session 1 that the case study of Philip will be very useful in modeling this process. It's very important for you to use this as a sort of starting point. It's really a modeling process, which means it shows you how you go about analyzing a case study with a particular theory in mind. So please draw on these experiences, draw on the thoughts and activities that you've already completed in helping you work through this. There's also obviously a lot for you to discuss within this particular case study. So I really want you to look at each one of the factors and forces, each one of the systems, and see how each one impacts the child. It's very important for you to think of how the one system impacts the other system and how everything can be holistically understood. Be guided by the instructions in your assessment guide. As I've already said, I've broken down the parts in the assignment in a stepwise manner. I shall be talking you through those parts, but please utilize the resources that you already have. I have put these online to help and assist you. For this section of the video tutorial, I will be going through the steps or processes of the assignment. I think many of you would have noticed that in the assignment instructions and guidelines, there's different parts, sections, or questions to the assignment. I've tried to explain what I require from you in these different sections, but I'm just going to be unpacking this in a little bit more detail in this video tutorial. So step 1 of the assignment is to provide a suitable introduction to your assignment. As the word introduction suggests, this just introduces the key arguments that you will introduce. Remember, the discussion of these introductory pointers will come in the body of the essay. It's very important for you to reflect back on the skills that you would have already developed in your academic literacy module. These skills will really help you in constructing an integrated essay. Part of the requirements of this introduction is that you briefly define the key principles or key understanding of Bronfenbrenner's theory, and how these key underlying principles around the factors and forces that shape particular behavior might relate to the case study of Anele. So coming back to this key point that I've put here, it's a brief definition. Be guided by the mark allocation. The mark allocation indicates how much detail the marker will be looking for. So in this particular section, the mark allocation is obviously 5 marks, so be very mindful of that and make sure that you construct a concise and to the point introduction. This is not a summary of the theory, it is an introduction to the theory. So take the key core principles, key core ideas of the theory, and then discuss how these may relate to this particular case study. Step 2 of the assignment is more practical or application based. You will be required to construct your own copy of Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model. Okay, so I'm not suggesting here that you reinvent the wheel. The model is already in place and has already been designed and theorized by Bronfenbrenner. So it's very important for you to work from the baseline model that has been provided for you in your study guide. You can find this baseline model in lesson 3 on page 77. Please use this as your starting point, and then what will then be required from you is to place specific details from the case study into this diagram. So just a clarification, you will be creating your own diagram. Please do not copy and paste this particular diagram. You will then be placing the details from the case study into the correct system. So before you can achieve this, you really need to read through and understand Bronfenbrenner's model and his key understandings behind the model, and only then will you be able to take information from the case study and place them in the correct system as per Bronfenbrenner's theory. There have been many questions on this particular part of the assignment, so I shall elaborate on this in the next slide that is upcoming. For this section, I just want to elaborate on the expectation that we have for step 2. I have received quite a few queries and concerns around this, so I did want to just respond to some of the questions that you have. So firstly, you will be required to construct your own diagram on Anele. So it's not sufficient to copy and paste this. You need to create your own diagram. But you will not just be placing this like it is. I will be looking for details from the diagram that you need to then place within this model. So it's very important for you to identify specific details from the case study and then you place it into the diagram. So for instance, if we're looking at the macro system, one of the factors that comes in there is the beliefs and values of culture. For this particular section of the macro system, you might indicate beliefs and values of culture, but you need to identify what are the beliefs and values of this particular family. Do not put too much information in here. The discussion of all of these different systems and how they shape and influence the individual, who obviously in this case is Anele, that will be discussed in step 3 of the assignment. So for this, I'm just going to be looking for specific details, and I'm going to be looking at, have you placed them in the correct system as per theory? Also, if I don't necessarily agree with your placement, I will then look at your step 3, your discussion, and then I'll see whether your rationale and explanation about why you placed specific factors in specific systems makes sense and is logical, and then you will be awarded marks. So please, when you are thinking of step 2 and step 3, I want you to think of them as mirroring one another. So essentially, all the different bits of information that you are going to place from the case study into this model, you will then be discussing that process in step 3 of the assignment. Please also note that there will be some marks left aside for creativity, so become as creative as you like, but please use this baseline model. The model is circular, there are nested structures, use this. Don't reinvent the wheel, the model is in its own way, but I'm going to be looking at are there creative elements that you are able to place into it? Some people have asked whether they can place pictures into it. That would be wonderful. Whatever you like. This is really just for me to award marks for those of you who go over and beyond the expectation. For this section, I just wanted to go through the brief understanding or overview of Bronfenbrenner's theory. So it's very important for you to remember for step 2 and step 3 that when we are focusing on Bronfenbrenner's theory, we talk about reciprocal dynamics of development. And what this reciprocal word means is that the process is circular. So the influence is not just in one direction, it's in multiple different directions. So if you go back to the model on page 77 and the model that I placed on the previous slide, you will notice that the arrows are pointed in 2 different directions. This indicates multiple levels of influences. So when you are looking at the model, we aren't just looking at different systems individually. We are looking at each of the systems independently. And that's essentially what Landsberg is describing here. He explains that Bronfenbrenner's theory is a multi-dimensional model, and there's layers of or levels of interacting systems. And also with this in mind, it's very important to look at the individual who's at the center, the holistic individual who is made up of physical, biological, psychological, social, and cultural dimensions or elements. So there is a lot of information that we can take out of a case study and place it into this particular model. But it's very important for you to think about how does one level, one part of the system, influence the other system. I don't want you to just look at it independently. I want you to look at it interdependently. Bronfenbrenner also stressed that the individual was a producer or active agent within the system. So I also want you to consider Anele as this active agent and producer in the system. So she's not just a product, she's not just shaped by external forces, she also shapes the environment that she lives in. She also influences change in her family dynamic in some way or another. For this section of the video tutorial, I really just wanted to provide an overview of Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory. Please be mindful that greater detail around this theory can be found in your study guide and of course your psychology textbook. What I just wanted to point out here is that obviously this is a hierarchy, so there are levels of different needs. We have basic lower order needs and we have higher ordered growth needs. So for instance, if we look right at the bottom, we have our physiological, sometimes referred to as biological needs. These are the needs that are essential to our survival. Then once these needs are met, then our safety or security needs become paramount. This refers to emotional safety and security and physical safety and security. Then from that comes the love and belonging needs, otherwise referred to as our social needs. So once we feel a sense of security, we then crave the company of other people. So this obviously deals with friendship and the family sector. Once these needs are established, we have good, strong connections with important people in our lives, then our relationship with ourselves becomes paramount or important. So that then sets the stage for esteem needs, which is then the next higher order level need. Obviously, this deals with your relationship with yourself, the way you see yourself, how confident you are you achieving, are people recognizing your achievements, those kind of things. This whole idea of actualizing your talent and potential. And then that comes with self-actualization. In this particular model, they refer to self-actualization as self-realization, but essentially what self-realization and self-actualization refers to is this whole idea of knowing what your inner innate potential is and you're living out this potential. So with this, you are obviously being creative, you are achieving, you're being spontaneous, and you are obviously problem solving. So you have a good sense of understanding with yourself, you have secure relationship with others, you feel a sense of emotional and physical security, and all your biological needs are met. So this is just a very brief summary of the theory. There is more detail, obviously, in your other resources, but what I just wanted to point out here is that it's very important to look at these needs as being leveled. That's why we call them hierarchy. We have lower level needs and higher ordered needs. So it's very important for you, with looking at the case study of Anele, to consider which one of her needs are being compromised by her environment and which of her needs might be met and why. It's very important for you to think of the why for this particular stage of the assignment. So very important for you to start with an understanding of the theory and then go and tackle that step or stage of the assignment. Coming back to Bronfenbrenner's theory and the construction of your own version of his bioecological model and placing details from the case study of Anele into that baseline model, the next step or stage of the assignment is to then critically discuss the interactions between the factors and the various systems as indicated in your diagram with reference to Bronfenbrenner's theory. So that is why I said earlier in this video tutorial that you must see step 2 and step 3 as being development or progression of one another. Essentially, what this requires from you is to describe the model that you created. What you are noticing in the model, what you should be discussing, is how each of the systems shape and influence the individual under focus. Obviously, the individual here is Anele. But in order to understand her holistically, we need to look at the different systems that she interacts with on a daily basis. We need to look at the important stakeholders or important figures in her life. What are they doing to affect her development and her behavior progression? It's very important for you to look at each one of the systems and each one of the details that you provided or placed in the specific systems, and for you to think about how do these systems interact together? How do these systems influence one another? So keep coming back to on that previous slide when I went through a very brief overview of Bronfenbrenner's theory, but you are looking at the interactions between the different systems. We do not look at the systems independently, isolated or on their own. We look at how each of the systems are interdependent. Each of the systems are connected. How what happens at one system influences factors in the other systems. You need to look at all these connections, and you need to see, very much like a spider's web, how each one is integrated and interconnected. So in your discussions, I want you to think about whatever you've placed in the macro system, look at exosystem, mesosystem, microsystem, and think how does what happens at this level influences the individual right at the center. And to briefly just use an example to explain this theory, even if we look at the situation that we now find ourselves in with this coronavirus pandemic, something that happened, a disease that started in China, is now in South Africa. So as much as we are looking at the global spectrum, we are seeing how everything is interconnected. We live in this global world. So what happens in one area affects the other. So in a very real sense, we are seeing system thinking and systems theory, and particularly Bronfenbrenner's theory, now taking place. So what has the government now done to respond to this pandemic is they've implemented specific laws, a lockdown, a shutdown. So those particular laws will obviously be found in the macro system. This comes under the democratic government and the rules that they've made. And obviously the rules that they've made here actually influences elements of the ecosystem, because we know that the neighborhood and neighbors are in the ecosystem. So there's actually controlling the movement of neighbors and the neighborhood. This then influences who do we interact with within the mesosystem. Obviously, part of the microsystem is also the school. Because of this coronavirus, this issue that's obviously now affecting the health system, which once again is in the macro system, is actually influenced the school, which is in the micro system, because the schools have closed down. And all of these things that are happening at a government level, at a larger societal level, at a neighborhood level, at a community level, actually influences the individual. Each one of us, maybe we might be experiencing a sense of anxiety, a sense of fear, and that's actually for a lot of issues that are occurring at the macro system level. So it's very important for you to see the connection between the different systems. I hope that example makes sense. If any of you still have further queries around this and you want to debate and discuss it with the use of Bronfenbrenner's theory, I welcome any kind of discussions or notes on your particular forum pages. Okay, so this step 4 requires you to apply your understanding of Maslow's theory. So I've briefly gone through Maslow's theory in that previous slide, but you're going to take your understanding of his theory about our various needs that we have, and then I want you to look at this theory and focus on the case study. So look at, as you are going through the case study, I want you to think about what is physiological needs, what are safety needs, what is love and belonging needs, what are esteem needs, what are self-actualization needs. And then taking that understanding of theory, you need to look at which one of these needs are compromised, and I want you to think why. Are any of these needs met, or are all of her needs unmet? I want you to really look at it from a critical lens. So see what has been met and what hasn't been met. And it's very important for you to explain this with use of examples and details from the case study. Please be mindful that this section is only worth 10 marks. So there is a lot you can write about this, but focus on the really important, or what you deem to be important needs that have not been met or needs that have been met. And then obviously support this discussion with examples and details from the case study. It's very important that in each of these discussion tasks that you discuss the theory, you unpack the theory, and then you come back to the case study. Remember, you are not just retelling the case study, you are explaining it. So be very mindful that you aren't just paraphrasing and retelling, but explaining it. Put it into your own words, put it into your own framework of understanding, and then you'll see that you will do very well within these particular sections. So step 5 is to discuss stakeholder strategies. So this is quite open. Really what I want you to do here is to discuss specific strategies that the important figures in Anele's life could implement in order to promote healthier functioning in her life. So I want you to kind of think of these strategies alongside Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Think about what are her needs, which one of her needs are being met, which of her needs are being compromised. So keep looking through this, and very important that when you do implement strategies, when you say, for instance, this is something that the father can change, and this is what the father should do, and this is how this would help Anele, that you make sure that this is very realistic. So for instance, perhaps something like if Anele was, her family was perhaps very poor, economically disadvantaged. The case study doesn't necessarily indicate this. It depends how you want to understand, how you view the case study. But for instance, if one of your strategies that you put with regards to this was that she needs to get a professional tutor, she needs to go for in-depth psychological treatment, all of these kind of things would require money, and that might not be realistic given the family's circumstance. Let's just say that that was made explicitly clear in the case study. So that's what I'm looking at. So for instance, yes, that could be a strategy, but it's not very realistic for this particular family. So therefore, starting with those ideas, how could you maybe think of something that's perhaps more realistic? So perhaps with regards to needing psychological help, maybe is there another means of access to getting some kind of counseling? What is given from the state? What is provided from the state? Those kind of things. Look at things that are very realistic. And with this in mind, I want you to also think about what the teacher can do too, because why I've actually put this in is because I want you to also think of yourself as a teacher. If this was perhaps you as the teacher, what could you realistically do? So a lot of the times as teachers, you won't be able to influence change in the home environment. There are strategies that you can implement that may help, but it's very important that you focus on your role and your capacity as a teacher. So what can you do for her in your personal capacity within the school environment to help and assist with some of the needs that she has? This is very open, but I want you to really think realistically and once again look at the case study, look at the details that I have provided, and substantiate your understanding of what should be implemented to best help the child develop successfully. And the final steps of the assignment, I think, are very self-explanatory. So you need to add an appropriate conclusion to draw your assignment to a close. Once again, this is only for 5 marks. So really focus on concluding what you have already discussed. So this wraps up your argument, it closes your argument. Please come back to the skills that you have already developed in academic literacy. Remember that there's no new information in the conclusion. You are not placing new details. It's really just summing up what you have already discussed. Basically, the conclusion and the introduction should mirror one another. The introduction introduces what you are going to discuss, and your conclusion concludes what you have already discussed. It's also very important for you to attach your reference list of at least 4 different references. So it's very important for you to include at least 1 textbook, 1 website, and 1 journal article. As much as I said at least 4, it's great if you want to use more. That's wonderful too. Remember that you also need in-text references. So everything that comes in the in-text, as the name suggests, it's in the text, it's in the discussion, in your essay, must obviously be mirrored on the reference page. So all the details that are on the reference page, I need to see the corresponding in-text reference. Once again, please reflect on the skills that you have already developed in your academic literacy module. These marks are very easy marks for you to achieve for just following the correct formulas and the correct strategy for referencing. And finally, I think we all know this, but some of us don't necessarily give enough time and effort to this. Always proofread your assignment. So check your overall grammar, sentence construction, argument, and academic tone. It's always a good idea to read out your assignment out loud so you can perhaps hear where the grammatical errors are coming in. And this requires time and effort. You will not be able to do this assignment the night before. You need to see this assignment as a process. Yes, it is quite an in-depth assignment, but I've really structured it in a way that if you follow the steps and you follow the procedure, you can easily pass this assignment. So please take this assignment seriously. Really think about it as if Aneli was a child in your school environment, and you are now figuring out what is going on in her different systems. How do we look at her global experience, her holistic experience, her social life, her outside life, and how this is actually influencing and affecting her in the classroom environment. As a teacher, it's very important for you one day that when a child is displaying problematic behavioral patterns, it's very important for you to try and understand why, what is the cause of these problematic behaviors, and what solutions can you implement. So that is really the heart of this assignment. Obviously, I'm encouraging you to reflect on this very objectively. There is a different teacher here, so you can actually look at what the teacher is doing wrong and be very objective about it. And one day when you are a teacher, it's going to be a more subjective experience. But my hope is that the skills that you will be carried through or carried out in this assignment will actually carry through one day in a real classroom situation. So please, while you are doing this, have this in the back of your mind as well. I've really thought long and hard about this assignment, and I really hope that you come up with something very meaningful and informative. And that is where we draw this video tutorial to a close. Thank you to those of you who've lasted this long. I'm hoping that you will now go back and re-listen to different parts of this video tutorial. However, for those of you who have more questions, queries, concerns, or anything that you'd like to pose to me, please go post these in the forums that are available, particularly the assignment forum that I have posted right at the top of the page. Please go post your questions there. As I have already said, I will take up to 3 working days to respond to this question, but you are more than welcome to respond to your colleagues or peers' questions if you feel like you are able to do so. I'd like to encourage you within these forum spaces to engage with one another and build on one another's understanding and experience. I will then also come in on the page and share in any discussion points that you are posting. Thank you for your time, and keep happy, healthy, and keep at a safe social distance. I wish you luck in adapting to this new normal that we find ourselves in. And if you are feeling particularly anxious about anything, please feel free to send a message and I will respond, obviously when I can, within 2 to 3 working days. Thank you so much for your time and all the best.